What's a story that you've heard that still gives you chills to this day? Story 1. This is a story about my dad. When he was younger, he played outside one day near a small river with a friend. Living in southern Wisconsin, it was probably cold. While playing, they noticed something strange in the water. A capsized canoe with two guys, probably fishing, hanging on for dear life in the freezing water. He says they had already turned sort of bluish and could barely talk, so he and his friend got the men out of there and essentially saved their lives. It became a significant event in their town, with a story about it in the local paper and everything. Fast forward about 5 years. My dad was on his way to a concert in Chicago with one of his buddies in his new car. Of course, they were young and stupid. It was the 1970s, so who wears a seatbelt, right? As they were driving past a bar, a mobile home came flying out of the parking lot into the street. The driver obviously didn't look at all and was probably hammered. My dad crashed his car head-on into this trailer and totaled his car. The fact that they weren't wearing seatbelts saved their lives. The bottom half of the car was crushed. The crash propelled them forward and upward. Luckily, nothing happened to him or his friend. Not a scratch. They were just shocked. Just as they got out of the car and tried to catch their breath, the propane tank on the trailer exploded and the whole thing caught fire. Stumbling out of the trailer were two guys in flames and they expired right there in front of everyone. It turns out these two guys were the same fisherman he and his friend saved 5 years ago. When water didn't work, the fire did the job. It looks like these men needed two kinds of supernatural forces to number their days. Story 2. My great-grandparents grew up in a small town in the lower regions of Louisiana. Raised in a healthy diet of squirrel stew and local folk tales, they embodied the Cajun stereotype. When my great-grandparents were first married, they lived in a small house near a cane field. Across the field stood a Catholic church that ministered to the most humble Bayou town. My great-grandparents made it a habit to attend church during daylight hours, as it was a long walk to and from church unless they walked through the cane. One night, for some reason, they decided to attend evening mass. They walked to church as the sun shifted down below the visible earth. When they exited the building, it was pitch black. Fatigued from a long day of work, my great-grandparents decided to walk through the cane and avoid the long path. The crickets chirped as my grandparents crunched their way through the cane, one right behind the other. They could barely see through the dim moonlight, leaving them to rely on sound and touch. Working their way through the cane was tiring and my great-grandfather stopped to catch his breath. My great-grandmother bumped into him and they both froze. Another set of footsteps had joined theirs. They stood frozen in place, hearing the heavy thud of feet crunching against the cane. My grandfather began to slowly walk, my grandmother by his side. They were afraid to enrage the visitor. My grandmother noted its odd walking pattern. Immediately, fear ran through her. She began to run and then the footsteps behind them grew fast-paced. My grandfather took off after her, not wanting to be caught by the visitor. After about 5 minutes of sprinting, they reached the end of the cane field, their house in sight. They quickly raced to the door, fumbling to unlock it. A shadow emerged from the cane field, walking on 4 legs. It began to run at them as they managed to unlock the door. As they opened it, their dog ran inside. Their dog, Kaiser, trembled as they locked the door once more. Kaiser was usually a fearless animal and often accompanied by my grandfather on his hunting trips. His bravery vanished as soon as the door began to shake. Something was banging and scratching on the door. My great-grandfather assumed it was some animal. Then the doorknob began to jiggle. Somebody was turning it from outside. Eventually, it stopped. Shuffling could still be heard outside the door. My great-grandfather grabbed his rifle and stood guard all night as my great-grandmother slept. When the sun began to rise, the noises outside ceased. When they opened the door, it was covered in large scratch marks. Until her death, my grandmother claimed that she was chased by the Rugaru, Cajun werewolf. Story 3. This is a true story that happened to me. 5 years ago, I responded to a call for a respiratory emergency. As we were pulling out of the station, we got an update from dispatch to expedite, that the person had become unresponsive. We arrived at this dilapidated, super creepy house. What was so unsettling about the house was the layout. There was a very strange family that lived there. They were all very pale and dirty and would keep going indoors and exiting out of the other doors. It was all very, very unsettling. After a bit of confusion, someone told us that the patient was at the top of the stairs. We got to the top and there she was, half underneath the bed, completely undressed, looking almost like that girl in the closet at the beginning of The Ring. We began CPR and I was trying not to get sick. I was a rookie at the time, but as I was looking around, more and more things were completely wigging me out. Odd things were written on the walls, the pungent smell in the room, and the soiled mattress in the bed that our patient was under. It was a puzzling scene to say the least. Anyway, she didn't make it, so we had to gather the family up along with the police and paramedics and inform them that she wouldn't make it. What made it so strange was that one of the daughters, who was right around my age, was staring very strangely at the room that her mother was in. Fast forward to a few days later and I was taking my then girlfriend out to dinner. I needed to stop at work to get my paycheck before the bank closed. As we headed out, I noticed that it was already getting dark. While driving, I realized that we were about to pass the house and I said, "Remember that CPR call I told you about that was really creepy? We're about to pass the house." As we passed by, I noticed the soiled mattress in the curb. My then girlfriend said that the mattress alone was already creepy and probably illegal. I told her that the family is literally the creepiest group of people that I've ever encountered. When I got to the station, I took my paycheck and we were off to the bank. Now here comes the part that will haunt me for the rest of my life. As we were approaching the house, I noticed the daughter standing on the sidewalk staring at the mattress. As we passed by, her head cocked up, and she locked her eyes on me. She was giving me the eeriest, scariest look. I swear it happened in slow motion. The only way I can describe it is that she looked hungry. I have no idea how she knew it was me. I was driving my personal vehicle with no distinguishing markings or anything. Also, there was a steady stream of traffic, so it's not like I was the only car on the road and would just break concentration. I knew I wasn't imagining it because it also scared my then girlfriend. Story 4. When I was younger, my math teacher went off on a tangent about everything happening for a reason and why it's always important to be kind. At first, I was only half listening, but then things got interesting. When he was a senior at the university, he decided that in his last days, he would go around to students sitting alone in the cafeteria and strike up a conversation. He approached a girl sitting alone and asked if he could have lunch with her. She seemed hesitant at first, but then agreed. They struck up a conversation, and they ended up talking for a while. She eventually asked him in a startled way why he came and sat with her. He explained to her that it became his goal to sit with people he didn't know. She told him that this wasn't the first time someone had randomly asked her to have lunch with him. Apparently, when she was in high school, she was very shy and unpopular and usually spent her lunch breaks in the library. Towards the end of the year, a group of popular girls asked her to have lunch with him. She was shocked and said no at first, but they persisted, and she eventually agreed. They got in one of the girls' cars and drove off school property, headed to a restaurant. As they were driving down the road, dozens of cop cars whizzed past them. She went to Columbine High School. It was April 20, 1999. She escaped being in the library where the majority of the firing took place because a group of girls decided to reach out to her. I was hoping for a different ending, something sinister. Like the popular girls turning out to be witches and having malevolent plans for the girl. Too bad, too bad. But sometimes when something is meant to happen, it does, just like in Story 6. Story 5. In post-World War II Berlin, money was scarce. Supplies were tight and it seemed like everyone was hungry. During this challenging time, a tale circulated about a young woman who encountered a blind man navigating through a crowd. The two struck up a conversation and the man asked her for a favor. Could she deliver the letter to the address in the envelope? Since it was on her way home, she agreed. The blind old man urged her to hurry as it was getting dark. The little girl ran as fast as she could but stopped halfway, realizing something strange. How did the blind man know that it was getting dark? She turned around and spotted him hurrying through the crowd without his smoked glasses or white cane. Naturally suspicious, she went to the police. When the police paid a visit to the address in the envelope, they made a gruesome discovery. 3 butchers had been harvesting and selling unusual meat to the starving people. And what was in the envelope the man gave to the woman? A note, saying simply, "This is the last one I am sending you today." Story 6. Throughout my grandmother's entire life, she had a recurring nightmare. In this haunting dream, she would find herself walking down a long, dark hallway. At a certain point, she would turn to the left, open a door, and witness something terrible. Strangely, she'd always wake up before seeing the true nature of the horror. In her 40s, she, along with her husband, my dad, my aunt, embarked on a vacation. Due to a last-minute booking, they ended up with 2 rooms, each equipped with 2 twin beds on opposite sides of the floor. Around 3 a.m., my dad awoke with a sense that something was amiss. He called out in the darkness, "Dad?" There was no response. Concern growing, he switched on the bedside light. "Dad?" He called again, a bit louder this time. Still, there was no reply. Filled with worry, he slid out of bed and shook his father, but he remained unresponsive. My dad rushed down the hotel hallway to my grandma's room, frantically banging on the door. Anxious, my grandma opened it and my dad exclaimed, "Something's wrong with Dad!" He led her down the hallway, a long hallway. To the last door on the left, my grandmother reached the door, turned to the left and saw her lifeless husband in bed. It was a heart attack. Remarkably, she never had the dream again after that fateful night. Story 7. Late night on a highway in northern Ontario, a woman driving her car felt relieved to find a gas station that was still open, so she pulled in. The attendant came out and walked up to the driver's side, waiting until she rolled down her window, which she did with just a crack. "How much?" he asked. He told him to fill it up. The attendant walked towards the back of the car and stood there for a minute. The woman waited, then looked into the side view mirror. The attendant was just standing there, facing her. She felt nervous, wondering why he was not pumping gas. He walked back up to the window and tapped on it. "You need to open the flap, ma'am." Feeling stupid, the woman clicked the gas flap open. The attendant walked back and started pumping the gas. A minute or so later, he finished and clicked the nozzle back into place on the pump. Then he stood there for a moment. The woman kept looking at him in the side view mirror, feeling ill at ease, being alone at a tiny gas station in the middle of nowhere with only the stranger. The attendant walked back up to the window and tapped on it. She reached into her purse, took out her credit card, rolled open the window just to crack again, and as she passed the card through, she looked up at the attendant. He stared down at her with wide, frightful eyes. She looked away quickly, feeling creeped out, and rolled the window back up as soon as the attendant grasped the card. But he didn't go to the cash booth. He just stood there for a moment. The woman couldn't bear to look at him again. Finally, he said with a muffled voice through the closed window, "Ma'am, there's a problem with your card. Would you please step inside the cash booth?" "What's wrong with the card?" she asked loudly, with a definite strain in her voice. "Something's wrong with the barcode. I'll need you to come over to the cash desk so we can make a call to the company." There was no way she was getting outside her car on an empty dark highway late at night with only that weirdo around. Besides, she realized, as a sudden chill overcame her, how could he know if there was a problem with the barcode if he hadn't even been to the cash desk to swipe it? The woman's breathing increased as panic crept upon her. She summoned up a note of restraint in her voice. "Please, can you just call them yourself?" "Sorry, but I'll need to see some ID. Could you please just step over to the booth? It'll only take a minute." Realizing he wouldn't let it be, she whispered a prayer and reached into her purse to check for cash. Yes, she had a $50 bill. Clutching it in her hand, she unrolled the window just to crack yet again and passed it through. "Never mind, I'll just pay cash." "Ma'am, are you sure?" he asked. "What?" She almost yelled as she accidentally looked up at him again. The same wide, fearful eyes stared down at her. She looked away. "Yes, cash." "I can fix the card problem. You just need to come over to the phone with me," he said. She was really terrified now and half screamed at the man. "Listen, a-hole, it's cash. That's all you're getting from me." All right, he responded. "Now you just wait right here. I'll go get your change. Don't move. I'll be right back." She could see him out of her peripheral vision, walking backwards toward the booth, always facing her. She couldn't bear to look his way. She couldn't imagine what he had in the booth. What if he brings it back with him? Screw the change, she thought. Just as she realized he also still had her credit card, she couldn't take this anymore. "Forget the card. I'll cancel it." She started up the car, and as soon as it hummed to life, she tore away and off into the dark night. The attendant was in his booth on the phone, breathing heavily. An official-sounding voice on the other end asked, "Did you tell her?" "No," the attendant responded. "I couldn't." "Why not?" "He had a weapon and a finger to his lips. I tried to get her out of there, but the whole time he was watching me from the floor behind her seat." Too bad this lady didn't watch the movie Zombieland. Rule 31. Always check the back seat. Might make or break your survival. Do you know what else can help you survive terrifying experiences? Liking this video and subscribing to my channel would be because you might pick something up from my terrifying tales. Story. As a funeral director, I once had a man come in who had lost his teenage daughter. She was a daddy's girl through and through, so he was devastated by her passing. Determined to give her the best, he spared no expense. A beautiful casket, a sturdy vault, and everything else money could buy. However, after she was interred, he began experiencing nightmares that his daughter was drowning. These haunting dreams took various forms. In the bathtub, in the ocean, or when a car she was in careened off a bridge. Although the details differ each time, the distressing message remained constant. In every dream, he could hear her desperate cries, "Daddy, help me, I'm drowning." It's important to note that drowning had absolutely nothing to do with the actual cause of her demise. Initially attributing the nightmare to grief, he soon realized they wouldn't let up. Seeking a solution, he returned to us, explaining the situation. With a permit, we arranged to disinter her and move her to another cemetery. During the process, as the diggers removed the lid from her vault, which incidentally was designed to keep water out, it was shockingly filled to the brim with water. After relocating her, the nightmares ceased, bringing a measure of relief to the grieving father. Story 9. 2 years ago, I was in a car wreck. I was driving home late at night, fell asleep at the wheel and slammed into a tree on my driver's side front door. I have no memory of what happened for the next couple of days, but I woke up in the ICU strapped to a bed with a respirator and feeding tube in me. Every doctor I've seen since then looks at me in shock and tells me I shouldn't be here. The chilling part of the story is how I was found. Some neighbors of mine were driving home late from dropping their daughter off at a bus that she was taking to camp, where she was a counselor. The bus left late. It was delayed because another couple of counselors were an hour and a half late. One of them was my best friend from elementary school. After they finally dropped their daughter off, they headed home and were driving down a secluded road near our neighborhood. The wife saw a car parked on the wrong side of the road but couldn't see any damage because it was dark and on the opposite side of the car. They kept driving until she thought she heard honking and convinced her husband to turn around. I was unconscious. The car was a wreck and the horn was found to not be working later. They didn't know it was me until 2 days later. They saved my life. Story 10. About 4 or 5 years ago, I worked at a Little Caesars Pizza. Usually I worked inside on the pizzas, but we just started up this Monday Madness deal where pizzas were only $4 on Mondays, so we needed someone to advertise. Being a wild and weird metalhead, I looked up the position on Mondays, just going out there, throwing around a sign to get attention, and bringing people in for pizza. It was not exactly glamorous, but I had fun. One day while I was out there doing my thing, I saw a van coming straight at me. It jumped the curb and slammed into me. I saw a quick flash as the traffic lights flicked off and then blacked out. I gasped, and I was still in the corner and nothing had happened. No van or anything. Well, I was a little shaken up, so I decided to pack it up and walk back to the store for a break. I was no more than 15 feet away from the corner when I heard a crash. I looked back and the van had just topped the curb into the electrical box, and I watched the traffic lights flick off. Needless to say, I took the day off. I still think about that from time to time. Story 11. There was this one about 6 people going through a cave. It was very dark, but they knew it was a straight shot, so they all held hands and walked in together. One of the guys gets separated from the main group and just has one person holding his hand. He sees the light at the end of the tunnel with his 5 friends waiting for him there. The hand slips out of his. It would have been better if the hand holding him tightened and began to slowly drag him back into the cave. Story 12. When I was in my early teens, my parents used to go out dancing and leave me alone on Friday nights. We lived in a rustic, soporific house surrounded by only a desolate sawmill and a defunct car garage. The closest neighbor was about a mile away. I used this opportunity to throw heavy metal albums into their fantastic stereo and play them at an enormous volume. One evening I put in Metallica's, and Justice for All, and went to the restroom in a small corner of the house. Blackened was blaring in the distance. It seemed as if the floor was shaking. I walked back into the living room and looked at the front door, and I could see the chain on the door pulsating in rapid rhythms. I remember thinking, the bass on this system is incredible. And during the middle of the song, the chain stopped moving. Story 13. My grandfather's second wife was a sleepwalker, the kind that would get out of bed and do things like make a sandwich in the kitchen. My grandfather became used to it, and whenever he woke up in the middle of the night and she wasn't in bed beside him, he would find her and gently lead her back to bed without waking her up, just as he had been advised. But one night he woke up and she wasn't lying in bed. Instead, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, her back turned to him. He called her name to ask what was wrong, but she didn't answer, and he realized she must be asleep. He could tell that she was doing something, holding something in her lap, but he couldn't see what it was. He sat up, looked over her shoulder, and saw what she was doing, still in her sleep, loading his revolver. I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you made it this far, I'm sure you'll also enjoy. Have you had a terrifying experience that felt like it was straight from a horror film? Story 4 will make you think twice about sneaking out at night. See you on that video.